Welcome to the series Reconciling Science and the Bible. I'm glad you're here. Today's lesson is the 11th lesson in the series, and it seeks to answer the question, why does God allow evil in the world? This lesson asks the question, why would a God who is perfect, pure, and holy create man and put him with desires for both the sacred and the unholy, and then place him in an environment that can be socially and culturally the exact opposite of life with God? Why would a perfect, good, and holy being create a world in which evil exists? Have you ever heard these three words before? Prior to starting on this lesson, I had not. Do you know what they mean? Well, I suspect you could guess that they have something to do with theo, referencing God, or cosmo, referencing the universe, or anthro, referencing man. The words mean this: theodicy, why does a good God allow evil in this world? Cosmodicy means the goodness that we can glean from looking at the cosmos or cosmology. And anthropodicy means the goodness that is in humanity. The lesson today is all about theodicy, why God allows evil in this world. We know that God is love, and the two are completely inseparable. Only God is pure love. No other comes close. God's love is not conditional, and it is applicable to everyone in creation, and it is fully complete. And God's love is completely without conditions. He offers his love to any who will accept it. That's what we know. But we also know that on times he has shown anger. How is that possible? It is odd that God is pure love, yet God gets angry. There is unrighteous anger, which we engage in all the time. And then there is righteous anger. God always models righteous anger. His anger is rooted in his love. He loves the world so much that it angers him when we self-destruct and we miss out on maximizing our lives. So he has good reason for acting with anger toward man's unrighteousness. In fact, he could not be a good God without getting angry at unrighteousness. But we must be careful here. We cannot apply our understanding of anger, that is, human anger, to him. Paul tells us a little bit about God's love. If God is love, then he has all these characteristics: patience, kindness, not being boastful, not being proud, honoring others, completely selfless, not easily angered, keeping no record of the evil deeds that we may do. Pure love expounds in love, and it hates evil. It protects, trusts, hopes, and perseveres always. Love never fails. These are all qualities of our God. He is not easily angered, and I am so glad about that. And perhaps you're with me on that one. But unlike God, who is the essence of love, our love is often conditional. I love you if. I love you when. I love you in spite of. I love you as long as. God puts no conditions on his love. He simply says to us, I love you. We should desire to love like that. We should not add qualifiers to our love for others, even our enemies. But that is such a high standard. There's a legal term, quid pro quo, which stands for in exchange for. I love you if you will do this for me. I love you if you love me back. I love you if you remain faithful to me. God's love has no quid pro quo conditions. God is love. Now, fear is a great motivator. Why else would you prepare your tax returns each year by April the 15th? We should not fear God in the way of being always afraid, but sometimes we do. Am I attentive to others' needs so that God will love me? Do I have others' best interest in heart as God always does? If we harbor these kinds of thoughts, then we're trying to determine if we are worthy of God's love. However, 100% of the time, we will fall short in one way or another. We can never truly be worthy of God's love and His kindness to us. Can you describe the relationship between love and God? Is it a character of God, a quality, a trait? Is it something that God does, something that He gives? No. The Bible tells us that God is love. We humans can truly love only when we understand that God is love. Now, our founding fathers believed in and trusted God. In 1864, we saw fit to have this engraved on all our currency. We trust God. There's no doubt that God exists. He is the supreme being and the greatest of all. So the question comes up, why does God allow evil to exist in the world? God's love, thankfully, is not contingent. It is not a favor that He extends to us. It is not subject to bargaining in any give and take fashion. It is not a contract. Instead, it is purely gratuitous, free, pro bono. His love is a gratuity paid to us. So, if God is love, what is the opposite of that? Hatred, animosity, malice, loathing. There are two kinds of evil. There are moral evils and natural evils. So we're going to look more closely at these two kinds of evil in the world. Now we have many names for various kinds of evil: murder, rape, slavery, abuse, conspiracy, larceny, and so forth. Natural evils are not really evils per se, principally because they are not caused by anyone who had a harmful intention. Nature is not out to get us on this planet, but try to tell that to one who is watching their house burn down in a wildfire, or someone who is in a canoe paddling away from their home in a flood, or to a family returning to the rubble that is their house after a tornado. Our world is filled with natural evils. This slide shows the number of and the cost of each kind of natural evil since 1980. How do we respond to natural evils? Just say, que sera? Or do we say, God did this? We know God didn't do it. Is the world we live in always a good world? No. There are natural evils that we have to contend with, and there's also moral evil. These evils are caused by humans, often against other humans. In 2019 alone, there were 17,000 homicides in the United States, almost 100,000 rapes, and 20,000 murders. These are the kinds of evil that we would call heinous evils. So, do you believe God is love? At least somewhere between 64 to 87% of the U.S. believes there is a God, according to a Gallup poll that was taken in 2018. I'm not so sure that just as many believe that God is a God of love. So, if there is a God who exists, and if God is love, then surely such a being would not allow evil in the world, right? But we know that evil does exist. Therefore, should we conclude that God must not exist? Is this valid logic? Is it reasonable thinking? You can take this even further and state all of God's qualities one at a time, and then ask for each one that if He is omniscient or omnipotent or omnibenevolent, then why would God allow evil? Therefore, there must not be a God. That would be faulty reasoning, though. So in fairness, the answer to the question, why does evil exist if there is a God, it really depends upon your definition of the words. So I would like to use an analogy, and I would like to ask, is there such a thing as cold in our world? Now, what a crazy question, you might ask. You'd probably be surprised, but the most technical and scientifically accurate answer to this question is no. Cold does not exist in our world. Why? How is that even possible? How is it possible for cold not to exist? If you've ever been in a duck blind in the middle of December, you might believe that cold exists. Well, technically, any temperature greater than 0 degrees Kelvin, which is extremely cold, has at least a modicum of heat in it. So it is at least somewhat warm. Cold is a word that we use to mean the temperature is lower than we would want or could want to live in. We cannot create any refrigerator, though, cold enough to take something to 0 degrees Kelvin. It's currently a scientific impossibility. That would mean in every atom, the electrons would have to eventually stop in their place, and that is currently impossible. So technically, cold does not exist. Scientists, in fact, can only freeze something to just a fraction of a degree of 0 Kelvin units. They can slow down the spinning operation of the electrons in an atom to just about 0 degrees Kelvin, but to date they have not been able to lower it to the point at which there is no electron movement, which would mean heat. This simply seems to be a universal constraint that things that exist must have molecular and atomic movement. If you ever could get to negative 500 degrees below Kelvin, you get to the complete absence of heat, and that would be the definition of cold. Atoms would have their electrons completely frozen in place were this to occur. Heat comes from the movement of electrons in the atom. As long as there is an electron movement, there's going to be heat. But to get the electrons in an atom to stop circling the atom requires a coldness that scientists are unable to create. So there is no way to have anything on Earth that has absolutely no heat. The first law of thermodynamics says that in this vast universe, there is no energy being created. At the same time, there's no energy ever being lost. So it might help you to imagine this at the next funeral you attend. At the funeral of a dear friend, your spouse, your parents, or heaven forbid, your child, from the perspective of the physicist, try to remember this. There is a principle in our universe called conservation of energy. The energy within the universe or the human never ceases. It never dies. Not 1 ounce of energy within you has ever died or will truly ever die as long as the universe exists. The first law of thermodynamics tells us there is no new energy being created in the universe, and the second law says this: no energy in the universe is ever destroyed. All of your energy, every BTU of heat, every vibration, every wave of every particle that ever was in you remains after you die. It's simply transformed. All the photons that ever bounced off your face are still present in the particle detectors in your spouses and your co-workers and even in the stranger's eyes who may have passed you by walking down the aisle in a grocery store. When you die, not 1 speck of you is gone in this universe. You're simply just less orderly when you die. Now, how about dark? We know the speed of light, but what is the speed of dark? Well, dark is like cold. Dark is simply where there is no light or very little light present. And we can recreate complete dark by going into a cave or into an airtight room where there is not even a hint of light. So technically, there's nothing called zero dark because that's only a convention that describes the absence of light. So finally we come to evil. Now, you may have deduced from the earlier slides dealing with cold and dark that you also cannot define evil as it is being the absence of good. Technically, there is no evil. Notice that in the Bible, God is never credited with creating anything evil. He only creates things that are good. He created man and called it good. Then the land, then the sun, the moon, and stars, and all kinds of creatures. And God never created anything called evil, simply because there must be some modicum of goodness in everything that exists. Here are a few other things that do not technically exist. Ignorance. Really? I know a few kids in my elementary school that might have been the exception to this rule. But IQ does not measure ignorance. It measures intelligence. It is improper to say, ever say, that you can measure the absence of some quality. If something does not exist, it is not in the realm of reality, and you cannot measure such a thing since it does not exist. Notice that when God created man, he called him good. God created a being initially with the absence of evil. He does this even today with each infant born. Only as the child grows does it learn that he has control over the amount of evil he will allow in his life. We all have free will to make that decision. We control our lives. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is an example of this. She was born a normal child in Macedonia, and she had to determine her own place in this world. She alone determined the amount of goodness that would be her own. She was not born with more goodness than any of us. She has exhibited quite a bit more goodness than at least most of us here. In the same way, Hitler was once a pure little baby, just like you or just like me. His society had a huge impact on his decision whether to be good or evil. He chose a life of despicable evil rather than a life of goodness. God is not culpable for Hitler's decisions in life. And God is also not the cause of natural desires. He does not deliberately cause natural calamities like earthquakes and floods and hurricanes and tornadoes or forest fires. So let's think a minute about what God could have done. Do you think you could do it better? Would you do away with any or all of these things if you were God? No free will. No need for forgiveness. No need to send his son. No physical disasters. No pain. No suffering. And no death. So he could have done it three different ways. First, he could have removed free will. Sometimes we wish our children would do as we say, mind us, be obedient. But at the same time, we want them to live and have a choice in their own lives, to discover the effects of doing wrong and to discover the joys of doing right. We would not remove their free will even if we could. God could have removed our free will. Everyone would only do what he instructs. Could you have a meaningful relationship with God if this were the way he chose to do it? What about free will? Could he not remove free will on an as-needed basis? For instance, he would correct evil actions supernaturally before they occurred. He would stop a drunk driver from causing an auto accident. He would stop a lazy worker from doing a substandard job. He would stop an addict from doing harm to his wife, his children, or others. He would stop all robberies, tax evasion, bullying, thieving, shoplifting. Now, this sounds good, but each one of us wants some of these lesser evils to exist, our favorite, not quite so evil evils. Something quite a bit less than, but not quite drunkenness. Something less than, but not quite recreational drug use, pornography, foul language, overeating, gambling, cheating on tests, and so forth. He certainly could have done that. But when should he stop a terrorist, for example? Just as he is about to flip the switch on a bomb? As he is making the bomb? Or stop indoctrinating of the terrorist before he begins a life of terrorism? Or should he not even allow a terrorist to be born? The third way God could have done it would be to remove all evildoers. Now, that might seem like a great thing until you ask yourself, would he have also removed you? If God were able to remove all evildoers, the world would be a strange place, I dare say. No humans would exist. So the final option is the option that he took. We are allowed to make decisions on how we will act. We act, or we should act, after we consider the consequences of our actions. And we all have a sinful nature, but God wants us to choose him over sin. Sooner or later, we will be judged. He does not want to condemn us, but the choice is ours. If he did not restrain evil, the world would be even worse. So the final action is the option that he took. God gave us the ability to think and reason. He also gave us free will to do as we choose. We may be, but do not have to be, doomed by our sin. He overcame sin for us to give us victory. Now, it matters not how many times you view this video. You're always ultimately going to ask the question, why? It appears that God made a mistake when he allowed evil in this world. But God has no culpability for the evils that exist. The real question is how? How we react when we are confronted with the opportunity to do evil, and the choice which is ours to make. It is not, why, God, did you allow this to happen? Thank you very much.